Good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me well?
Good afternoon. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes. Loud and
Very
clear.
good, very good. Thank you guys for being in our meeting today. We have a few subjects that we're going to address here today. I hope you guys are doing fine, you're doing great. It's been a good year so far. And we're expecting to be even better. So, with not much delays, let me fix myself here and make myself comfortable. Good. All right. We're going to start talking about a few things that happened this week, just to help you guys, maybe in the future situation that will be similar. So there's two things that I want to share with you. Number one is the type of contract that we use for certain properties. You know, some agents are confused about, should I use a commercial contract? Should I use a residential contract? Now, what defines a residential transaction is what I like to call a 4-4-10. What is a 4-4-10? It's a 4 units or less. So if you're dealing with a property that is 4 units or less, it's considered to be residential. The other 4 is for vacant lots, vacant land. Now, how can you determine if a vacant land is 4 units or less if it's vacant? By the zoning. Then you have to look into the zoning. And if the zoning says that it allows only up to 4 units, then you know that the land is also residential. And agricultural lots with 10 acres or less, it's also considered to be residential. Okay, so now you know when you're dealing with more than 1 unit, what type of contract you're gonna be using. Excuse me. Once you have defined if the property is residential or not, and that's how you do it. If you want to, you can write it down. It's 4-4-10. That's the best way to remember, is to use these 4 numbers: 4-4-10. 4 units or less. Zoning allowed up to 4 units on a vacant land, and agricultural lot with 10 acres or less. All those are considered to be residential transaction, residential properties. Another thing that happened is that one of our agents were dealing with a seller, and the seller signs the contract. And then after the seller signs the contract, the seller decides not to sell the property anymore, and she would start getting aggressive, demanding, I want to cancel the contract. Now, you guys don't have to put up for this. Number one, because we don't need this, right? Life is already difficult enough for us to have anyone yelling, demanding in our ears. And second is that there is no open window for the seller once the seller signs the contract. The only one who have the window to cancel the contract is the buyer. The buyer has 3 options. Number one, if you're using an as-is contract, is during the inspection period, the buyer decided that the property is not suitable for the buyer can cancel the contract without any explanation. And the buyer will get out of the contract and get his deposit back. Second one is if it's a condominium, after they receive the condo docs, they have 3 days. It's called the rescission period. So during these 3 days, if the buyer decides that they don't like the rules and regulations for the association, the buyer can get out of the contract and get his money back. And if it's a financing, if the buyer is denying the loan, then the buyer can get out of the contract also. And as you can see, there is no window for the seller. They can be upset, they can yell, they can do anything, but they cannot get out of the contract. And if they refuse to cooperate with the inspection appraisal, the buyer can sue the seller for specific performance, meaning sell it. Okay? So just for you guys to understand, if you have any situation like that in the future, that the seller, after signing the contract, decided to cancel it, the seller doesn't have that option. Luckily for everybody, the buyer agreed to cancel the contract and everything was resolved. But if the buyer did not want to cancel the contract, then the seller has to remain in contract. Okay, so the only option in that case is that if the buyer is denied on the loan, and then the contract will be canceled. Good, so far, any questions? You guys have any situation, anything that you guys want to share? Because one of the good things about our meeting is shared experiences, you know? It's impossible that we are going to face all different types of scenarios. So if we have 65 agents with us and they all can share their experience, we will learn from them. Okay? Got any questions? We good? All right, so we're gonna start with the addendums and agreements. Now, the first one is the extension addendum to contract. And as we were talking a few meetings before, it's very important that we keep track of the dates. And one of the very important date is the closing date. If you know that the title company or the lender are not ready to close on the date specified in the contract, 5 days before that date, you should be requesting an extension from the seller. Don't let it go 1 day before or the day of the closing, because if there is any difficulties to find the seller to sign the extension, then the buyer will be in trouble because it will be buyer's default. And if you are representing the buyer, you are also going to be in trouble as well because the buyer is going to blame you. So keep track of the date and use the extension contract. And the extension could be for the closing date, for the financing period, and for the inspection period. If you look into, I believe it's page 2 of the as-is contract, you specify that the lender will have a commitment letter in 30 days if you leave it blank. You can change that date, you can put 45 days, but if you leave it blank, it's 30 days. In 30 days, you have to have the commitment letter. And if you don't have it, you can use that extension to extend the financing period. And also you can use the same addendum to extend the inspection period. Okay? John, you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, definitely. This is a great addendum. This is the addendum that I recommend all realtors use when you want to extend anything that's listed here. A lot of realtors will try and use a blank form addendum. Don't do that because, again, as Scott has mentioned, that's practicing a law without a license because you're changing terms of a legal document. You can use this document because it's been pre-approved by the Florida Association of Realtors and the Florida Bar. So what's really good about this form is that it applies to several contracts: the residential contract, the vacant land contract, and the commercial contract. So it applies to all of them. And what I recommend doing is, if you have to extend the closing date because you don't have the loan yet, I highly recommend, if you can get away with this, checking the first 2 boxes, the extension of the closing date, but also the extension of the financing period. Because if the lender does not approve the loan, if it's still going on, it's still dragging on, the buyer doesn't get approved, they can still get out of the contract and get their deposit back. So anytime you're extending a closing date for financing reasons, also trying to extend the financing period as well. As Arlindo mentioned, the inspection period, this will come up where you do an inspection and the inspector finds that, hey, there might be mold in the unit. So you'll need to hire a mold inspector to come in. So you'll want to extend the inspection period because it ends at a certain time. And unless you extend it, you don't have that option of canceling the contract and getting the deposit back. A couple more things, as if you can scroll down, Arlindo.
That's all.
Oh, that's all you got?
Yeah.
Okay, so there is on the bottom, there is sometimes a space for additional items if you want to add something that's not included here. But then after that, have both parties sign and date, and you're good to go.
All right, great. Guys, in the middle of our presentation, if you have any question, feel free to interrupt us and ask the question. Now, the second one is the release and cancellation of a contract. And this form, it's very important because sometimes I've seen agents just going over a verbal conversation or emails that they exchanging, and this is not enough. We need to have a release and cancellation of a contract. The scenario that I explained to you guys about the seller that did not want to pursue with the sale and the buyer agreed to that, then we need to send the release and cancellation to the buyer and the seller for them to sign, and also to tell us how are we going to disburse the escrow. If there is any escrow involved, then we need to know how we're going to disburse. Seller, we're going to get the deposit. The deposit is going to go back to the buyer, or the deposit is going to be split between buyer and seller. We need to have that instruction, and that is on this form. Okay, so by signing this release and cancellation of contract, you are releasing the contract and the deposit, and then says here which one you're canceling, as is residential contract for sale and purchase. Okay, and if we scroll down, then it tells us how we're going to disburse the funds. Whatever amount to buyer, or whatever amounts to buyer and whatever amounts to seller, or the money goes to seller, and both parties will sign, and then the escrow agent will be able to disburse the money according to this form. Okay, so this is very important. Don't go by verbal conversation. Okay, have everything in writing and sign to protect yourself. Okay, John, you like to add anything to this form?
Yeah, another great form and another required form. Like you said, some people will say emails are canceling. No, what this does and why it's important is you'll see at the top there, release of liability. Buyer and seller release each other, and they release One-Way Realty Group and the brokers and the realtor. So that's why it's important. It releases all parties. And not only that, it must be used. I get a question a lot of, hey, well, we haven't submitted the deposit yet. I understand that, but that's still a requirement for the buyer to do that. And if you're still in contract, that's still a requirement that needs to be sent to the title company if this release hasn't been signed. So even if there is no money that's been sent to the title company yet, this form is still needed. The first page, it showed again that it applies to all contracts as is, residential, commercial, and vacant. So you can use this form for all those contracts, fill it out, and make sure buyer and seller sign it, and then everyone can go on their way.
Great. Now, the exclusive buyer brokerage agreement, that is something that we all dream about it, because we know how hard it is to work with buyers, because sometimes the buyers work with you and another 10 agents. Whoever brings the house that they want to is the one that will get the commission. And sometimes they don't tell you that they work with you and another 10 agents. But this is a very hard agreement for you to get the buyer to agree and sign it, because that will tie the buyer to you until he buys the property. So you will be entitled to a commission if they sign this contract, and this contract also has a term. You can put that it will be for 6 months. So during these 6 months, he's obligated to work with you and with you only. So if he purchased a property with another agent within this term period, then you're still entitled to your commission. But again, as I said, it's not very easy to get a buyer to sign it. But I had some agents that was calling me. Actually, last week, I got 2 agents calling me about which contract can I give to the buyer that will tie the buyer to me. And then I mentioned this agreement to them. So if you have a situation like that and the buyer will agree to sign it, this is a great one to use it. All right. John, would you like to add something here?
Yeah, a lot of buyers, like you said, are a little bit apprehensive about signing this, but you can say this is a document required by my broker. If you can put in a couple other documents too, like an info sheet or something, sometimes they'll sign it. It's a commitment by both. You know, the buyer is committing to use you, and you're committing to help the buyer. So yeah, this is, if you can get it signed, it's great.
All right. Great.
Arlindo,
Yes. Go ahead, Scott.
let me just add to that, I'm not doing real estate deals like everybody else is here because I've got my law practice, but I will get approached from time to time, whether it's family, friends, or a friend of a friend. And I tell them straight up, I said, look, I will help you. I'll be more than willing to help you. But I need to know if I'm the only one searching or if you have other people involved, because if there's other people involved, that's fine. But I'm not stepping into this. If you want me, then you will have me and only me, and I will need you to sign this exclusive agreement. And then you'll get 110% out of me, but at least I know I'm not spinning my wheels while you're shopping multiple broker or realtors, or you're looking for yourself. And that separates for me the wheat from the chaff. If they're willing to sign this, then I know they're serious and I'll work with them. If they're not, that's fine, but I'm not going to waste my time on it.
Yeah, good. This is a good strategy, Scott. You know, the way you put it, it's a very
For
good
me,
strategy.
for me, it works. I can't say it's going to work for every realtor that is hungry and doesn't have something else to generate funds for them. You're going to have to be more, reasonable, let's say, on taking deals where they won't sign this. I understand that. But for me, it's what I need to get into a deal.
Mm-hmm. Yes. As I said, it's a good strategy. But as you also mentioned, you have another source of income. So if the person doesn't want to sign the contract, you're basically not losing anything. But for a realtor that are full-time in real estate, they will rather take the chance, and sometimes it will work on their benefit. But if you can't get the buyer to sign this agreement, there's another agreement that you can use it, okay? And the other agreement is the showing agreement. Now, this is easier for the buyer to sign. And if he doesn't want to sign, then you don't want to get involved because you know that he's not committed to you. He might have a family member or a friend that has a full-time job in someplace else. They don't have a time to show them properties. So then they use your time to show them the properties. And when they find something they like it, then they give to this family member to do the contract. And you're not going to get anything. So if they say, I'm not going to sign this contract, you're not actually losing anything because you can't lose what you don't have. So this is very simple agreement. You just list all the properties that you are going to show to this particular buyer. And this says that if the buyer decides to purchase one of those properties, he's going to buy those properties with you. And if he doesn't, then you can go after him. So as you can see, it says buyer becomes interested in negotiating the purchase option, exchange, lease, or other acquisition of any of the property listed below. Buyer will utilize the professional service off, then you put your brokerage name, and then you list all the properties that you're showing them. If you go into a building that you're going to show like 3, 4, 5 units in the same building, then you list all the 3, 4, 5 units. And if you go to a different address, you list all of them there, the buyer signs, and you at least know that he is going to work with you if he likes one of the property that you are showing him. John, anything you're going to add? You like to add?
Yeah, this is another good form if you can get it signed. As we've talked about before, realtors are not chauffeurs. You're not out there just to drive people around and show them South Florida. This is your business, so I'm sure you take it serious. So it's also good to get serious buyers who are also taking it serious as well.
Yes, I had a situation where I felt that the buyer was not very serious on our conversation over the phone. And then I suggest that, look, I will show you the property, no problem, but I need you to sign the showing agreement. If they tell me no, I'm not going to leave my office to show the property to them because I know that they are using me just to see the property. And, I don't have a free time. But if they say, yes, I will sign it, then I take the agreement with me. They will sign it before I open the door of the property. I wanted them to sign it before I show the property. And then once I get the document signed, then I show the property to them. And it happens to me a couple times. And I believe only one person said that they don't want to sign this agreement. And they didn't show the property. All right, that's one way that you are going to avoid to become an Uber. There's nothing wrong to be an Uber, but if you don't get paid at the end of the trip, that's not so good. All right, now, sale of buyer's property. I had a situation, I had an experience with this in the past, and I believe the last month or so, we had 2 or 3 agents with the same situation. The buyer wants to put an offer on a property, but with the contingents upon him selling his property first. So that's the addendum that you're going to use. If this buyer does not sell his property, then he can walk away from the contract and not lose the deposit. Okay, so this is the form that you're going to use it in this scenario. And they can come back with a different addendum, which I'm going to show you soon. I'm going to just allow John to add something to this, and then I will show you the next one.
This is a very popular addendum we're seeing a lot of now. What's happening is, I guess, sellers, they're looking to either upgrade or get more space. So they're looking at other properties, but they don't want to buy because they're going to be using the money from the sale of their property to purchase this property. So this is a big addendum we're seeing now. It's great for the buyer. As it says there in the first line, this contract is contingent on the sale of the buyer's property. So what we're normally seeing is, we as a title company, we're trying to coordinate the closings. So the buyer sells the property probably in the morning and then buys the property in the afternoon. This is a great one for buyers looking to upgrade or expand their houses, as I mentioned. Just read it through. You can leave that second one blank, but this is another really good addendum to use.
All right, so the situation that I had with this was that the buyer was selling his property in New York and buying a property here in Sunny Isles. So I put this addendum together with the contract because this is a little trick. Because if your property is not even listed, meaning the buyer's property, it's not even listed, it's going to be hard to get the seller to accept this addendum. The property has to be at least listed for sale. Would be even better if the property is under contract. Then we know we are in a process of closing the buyer's property, and then we're going to close the one that he's buying. That is the best case scenario, which was my case. The buyer's property was already under contract in New York. and I presented this addendum. And they came back with this other addendum that is a kick-out clause. And what this kick-out clause means is this. They were asking an extra $5,000 in escrow. They wanted to continue list the property as an active property. And if they find a buyer that wants to buy the property, they would get out of the contract and sell to the other person. And also, if the buyer, if the buyer didn't accept that, the other scenario was that if the buyer's house doesn't close, then the buyer is still obligated to purchase the property or take the risk to lose the deposit. So I was representing the buyer. I crossed this and I sent back to them and I said, there's no way that my buyer is gonna sign this. And we had it like few arguments over the phone. And then I said, there's no way. It's either you accept it or we cancel the contract and I'll take my buyer somewhere else. And they finally accept that. And then we did not sign this kick out clause. If you are representing a buyer and you receive this form back from the seller, you bring them to me or bring them to John. So we're going to help you see what are the risks that the kick out clause will pose to the buyer. Okay, so this is very important. John, would you like to add something?
Yeah, the previous addendum you showed was great for the buyer. This one is terrible for the buyer, great for the seller. But it's interesting because what happens here is, okay, everyone's under contract, and what the seller's basically saying is, hey, we've got another offer. You can continue with your offer. We'll sell the property to you. However, you need to put an additional deposit and you're waiving all contingencies for financing and sale of buyer's property. So basically, the seller is saying, hey, look, we got another offer, but you can still buy it, but you don't have any of these contingencies. You're going to have to close on the closing day. Otherwise, we can sell it to someone else. So if you represent a buyer, unless your buyer is dying to have that property and they're okay with this addendum, you can have it signed. But like Arlindo said, you might want to definitely explain to them exactly what this means, because waiving all contingencies can be very, very important to a buyer who's trying to sell a house and needs that money to buy this house. So be careful with this one.
Can I ask you guys a quick question?
Go ahead, Chuck.
As some of you may know, the deal that I had been talking about the other week ran into a major snag, which ended up being the death knell, and that was the appraisal came back too low, and the developer wasn't willing to budge an inch. And so essentially, I used that 30-day rescission period that I had, and I rescinded the contract. Now, interestingly enough, as I had told you all, there was a series of addendums that they had me under the gun with, and they kept on getting me to sign. And one of them was that we were changing the form, or the I guess the architectural layout of the unit to more accurately reflect the build out of the den. So they attached that as an addendum, and then they squeezed in there that, again, if this deal didn't close, that I would be responsible for the tear down of that den, which wasn't done for me. And it made absolutely no sense. And again, John would have said, don't sign it in a million years. In fact, he did say that, but against the better judgment, I did, because I wanted to get this deal done. And that's one of those personal decisions you'll have to make, where a lawyer is going to turn to you and say, don't do this. And you got to decide, are you going to follow the legal advice and play it smart? Or are you going to take a risk and sign it because you don't want to lose the deal? So long story short, when this deal blew up, I said to myself, oh, Christ, I'm going to have to tear down that den build out, probably about $10,000. Now, one of the things that the seller, who was a developer, had been monkeying around with is every time I would sign an addendum or anything else, they would take forever to sign and get it back to me. So here I am, I realize I got to cancel this deal. I'm still within my 30-day rescission. Okay, that's good. But I got this addendum floating out there, which is going to make me responsible for tearing down that den. But the seller never signed the addendum and didn't get it back to me because that was the last addendum. And so I quickly had a process server hand deliver to their business offer consistent with the contract, the rescission termination letter, prior to them being able to sign that addendum and get it to me, so that I was able to avoid having to pay for that that tear down. But you know, the question then comes, in another unit I'm looking at, they are willing to take a backup contract. They have a contract, they're willing to take a backup, but they want a 25% deposit. Arlindo, John, what are your thoughts on that? Is that unusual to put or want or demand that kind of a deposit for a backup contract?
Well, Scott, it's not unusual. As we know in real estate, everything is negotiable. So they can request you to put 25% deposit, but it's up to you to accept it or not. It's still your decision to make. If you're going to put the 25%, or you go back to them and say, no, maximum that I can do is put 10% down or 15% down. That's part of the negotiation. There is no regulation for that.
For example, when you, John, you know, when you've said, hey, 10% is the maximum deposit you want to put down, you know, that would seem to me asking me for 25% down. Let's say I agree to that. Am I locked into that for the whole contract? Or is that just to see if my backup offer ends up coming into play?
Yeah, that's actually pretty crazy. I wouldn't recommend doing that. I've never held money, and we've been doing this for quite some time. I've never held money in escrow for a backup contract. You can submit the backup contract and say, okay, as soon as it becomes effective, I'll submit a deposit, but I'm not going to submit a deposit and just wait until you guys decide what you want to do with that first contract, hold up my money in case I want to buy something else. So it is very rare, like Arlindo said, and like you said, it's really up to you if you want to make that decision, but I've never seen it and I wouldn't recommend that either.
Mm-hmm.
Those were my thoughts. Okay.
Yeah, especially because it's a backup offer. You know, it's a backup contract. You don't know what's going to happen with the original contract that is in place right now, and why you're going to put money down. Of course, they want to see if your offer is strong, and that's one of the basic things in real estate, is to have a strong offer. You know,
Maybe you can
I had a situation that
proof of funds or something,
Sorry?
you know, a bank statement, like Arlindo was saying, instead of the deposit. Go ahead.
I mean,
Arlindo.
I'll be honest with you. I'm hesitant to get into a backup contract situation. It just seems to tie you up and just muddy the waters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let me throw this one last question. I'm sorry if I'm diverting, but let's say I want to put in multiple offers. Okay, I see a couple of units in a building. They're all priced similarly, and I want to put in multiple offers. How do I do that? Do I present each one of them with a signed contract? And what happens if two of them come back and the seller signs the contract and I'm sitting there holding two contracts? Am I then exercising, you know, my rescission period to get rid of one of them? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, well, it's not very good to put multiple offers. You know, I have a situation where the agent was calling me and asking me the same thing. They have a buyer that wants to put an offer in 3, 4 different properties. But in the same case as you have on a new development, you do have 15 days rescission period. And that rescission period, you don't need to give them any explanation. You can just cancel the contract. John, what would you add to this?
You would advise against handing multiple people contracts.
Yeah, I would advise not to do that.
Okay.
It's doable, Scott. Maybe in the industry, it's not really nice, realtor to realtor, to kind of submit something that you might not go forward with, but it is doable. And as Linda said, as long as you have that in the inspection period, but obviously it's also called the right to cancel period. As long as you have 10, 15 days in there, you can cancel that contract for no reason whatsoever and get the deposit back.
I
Yeah.
mean, if I did it, I would be upfront with them and I would say to them, hey, I'm putting in 3 offers on 3 different units in this building. So tell your seller that, you know, whoever gets me a contract back first, they win. So at least I'm upfront about it and they know what they're dealing with.
And not only that, you are, in a way, push them against the wall to take your offer, because if they don't, you already get you another offer in place.
Right. That's the goal. That's the
Yeah.
goal.
I think if you're upfront,
All right.
Scott, with anything,
Back on track. Sorry.
I think that's a professional courtesy, and I think that's great. As long as you're upfront, you're telling the realtors what is the situation, then I don't think there should be a problem at all.
Yeah, as long as you always remember that you do have the rescission period in place, that you can cancel and not lose your deposit.
So that's the fallback if I were to get 2 signed contracts back. And I've been upfront with them from the get-go, so they can't really gripe about it.
Yes. Yeah. And
Good.
you
Thank
don't
you,
need to
gentlemen.
tell them. Now, if you were buying a resale, right? A resale property, it's not a new development, it's a resale property. And you're using as is contract. If you look on the page, I believe it's page 7, where the inspection period is located, it says that if buyer, at buyer's sole discretion, decide that this property is not suitable for the buyer has the right to cancel and get his deposit back. So you don't even need to give them any explanation. There is no need for them to be upset with you because you canceled.
Right, but I want them to know up front, I'm putting in multiple offers so that then they know, okay, number one, we got to move on this, because if we're seriously considering this, so are several other people. And then number 2, nobody can accuse me of playing games and being, you know, unethical.
It's an honest approach. You know?
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, the walk-through inspection and re-inspection. I've seen a lot of agents doing a walkthrough without this form. And this form is very important because this form will release you and the brokers from any future problems that the buyer may find out after closing. So you put the property address, and then the purpose of this walkthrough is re-inspection, right? Re-inspection, because the buyer already did the first inspection when he sees the property. And also there was an inspector that came and do the full inspection of the property. And then you put that the property was provided, access to the property. The utility were provided also because they wanted to turn on the lights, they wanted to turn on the water to see if there's water on the property. And it says here, representative acknowledged that all requirement repairs and replacement have been made if there was the case. The maintenance requirement has been met, if was the case also. The property is in substantially the same condition as on effective date, meaning when the buyer put an offer, he saw the property. And now that he's doing the walking through previous to closing, prior to closing, then he sees that the property is exactly the same condition as it was when he put the contract, except for normal wear and tear. So, you know, painting, whatever. All items of personal property, including the purchase, are on the property, and other contractual obligations have been met, except as if there's anything that it's not corrected, then you're going to be listing that. And the buyer will sign. If 3 days later the buyer come back and say, well, there's something wrong, well, they cannot go after you for those things that he found later. So it's a very important form that you should have every time that you do a walkthrough. John, please.
Yeah, another good form, and definitely one to be used, and definitely because it forces you to have the buyer actually do a walkthrough Some realtors will say, oh, well, we saw the property during the inspection. It looked fine. We don't need to do a walkthrough. I highly recommend against that. Anything could happen. There could be some damage that was done during the move out. There could be some appliances that were removed. Walkthrough inspections, very important. The contract allows the buyer to do a walkthrough inspection one day before the closing or the day of the closing. So big issue with walkthrough inspections. Make sure they're done, and make sure if there's an inventory list, you go through, you bring it with you, you go through with the other realtor and make sure everything is checked off. If something is missing, you can postpone the closing because that's a contractual issue until the item is either returned or the item is repaired. So walkthroughs, huge deals and big to do before closings.
Yes, I'll share you one experience that happened with one of my colleagues about 10 years ago. He was representing a seller, and the seller has developed a type of toilets that squeeze water, you know, you guys figured it out. Not gonna go into details. So what happened is that he could not find any sponsors here in the United States. So he went to his country, he found a sponsor there, and he decided to move back to his country and start the manufacturing of this toilet. So he put his house for sale with this colleague of mine, and a guy from China called him directly, and he did a FaceTime video. The guy was happy with the house, decided to put an offer without seeing. He was in China. And he was very happy because that's something that we all dream about it. It's when you have a listing, you find a buyer, so you're on the both sides of the commission. So what happened is that they closed the deal and he did not do a walkthrough. The buyer was not here and he was assuming, well, the buyer's not here, I'm not gonna do the walkthrough. So he didn't go to the property before the closing. He sent all the documents to the buyer signed the documents, sent the wire, and it was closed. About 2 weeks later, the buyer flew from China to here to take possession of the property, and he picked him up at the airport and took him straight to the house. So when they got to the house, he went to the bathroom, and the toilet was not there because he installed all his toilet in his house as an experience. So he said, no, it's okay, let's look at the other bathroom. All 3 bathrooms in the house was missing the toilet. And to make matters worse, they broke the tile when they were removing the toilet. So now at the agent cost, he had to replace the tile, which was hard to find because it was discontinued, and also install new toilets in all 3 bedrooms just because he missed the walkthrough. So we had one of our agents that was representing a buyer that was not present at closing. They were overseas. And I told her to take a video on the house prior to closing, send it to them, and send them documentation that says that I saw the video, I saw the pictures, and I agree with the condition of the house, and release it. So it's never too bad or bad at all to protect yourself from situations like this. You know, you're trying to help a buyer, you're trying to do as much as you can to keep the buyer's satisfaction, you know, always up. And something like this happen, and you end up in the trouble that you don't need it. All right, so good. Now, commission agreement. Or we had like about 3 or 4 situations where one of our agents was dealing with the seller. The seller did not want to sign any. Oh, actually, yeah, that's true. The seller did not want to sign any listing agreement, but he had a buyer and he wants to take the buyer to the property. So this is the document that you're going to use it. You see at the first line says the seller's name, so or landlord, it doesn't matter, it works for both. and the brokers. So now the seller agrees that One-Way Realty Group may show, and we use it, diligent effort to sell property located at, so you're gonna put the address, and the prospect buyer, the name of the buyer, the prospect buyer. So then, in the event of the property sold to prospect or any other prospect procured by the broker, and you have the term, 180 days or 6 months, if you leave it blank, but never leave it blank, put the dates there. Thereafter, the seller agree to pay the broker, and we put it whatever you agree with the seller. Generally, you're gonna put it on the second box, 3% of the gross purchase price of the property. So now you secure your commission prior to showing the property to the buyer. So if the buyer comes behind your back within 6 months and purchase the property directly from the seller, you can still claim your commission because this agreement is valid for whatever term that you determine here. So that's why we put it always 6 months. And that's the same thing that we have on the listing agreement. It's called exclusive right of sale listing agreement. There is a clause there that's called protection period. And in my listings agreement, I always put 6 months, 180 days. Meaning if any buyers after the expiration of the contract goes directly to the buyer that I took to the property, goes directly to the seller and purchase the property, I can still claim my commission. John, please.
Actually, this is an important document. Where it played out in a situation that we were involved with was the seller did not have a realtor and the buyer did have a realtor. So the buyer's realtor contacted the seller directly and then asked me, said, well, what document do I use to make sure that I get paid my commission at closing since I don't represent the seller? And this document is the perfect document. Basically, the commission agreement, it's an agreement between the seller and you as the buyer's realtor that the seller will pay you at closing a certain commission of the purchase price. So this is another good document, especially when you represent a buyer and the seller does not have a realtor and you're speaking directly with the seller.
Yes. Good. Now, the referral agreement, it's another good one. If you are getting a phone call, that happens to me not so long ago, that one realtor from Michigan, if I'm not mistaken, reached out to me and said, I'm sending one of my friends to purchase a property in Florida. And I like to refer them to you, and I want a 25% of the commission. So that's how we secure our commission and their commission, especially if you are the one recommending someone to another state. Some of my agents ask me, Orlando, can I sell a property in Jacksonville? And there was this real situation about that. The answer for that question is yes, of course. You're licensed for the whole state of Florida, and Jacksonville is in Florida. You can sell a property in Jacksonville. But the question is, would you be willing to drive 6 hours to Jacksonville to show a property? You know, depends on the price of the property. That might not be the case. So it would be better for you to refer your buyer to some agent in Jacksonville. Then this agent will show the property to the buyer, and then you agree on a commission. And that cannot be verbally. You cannot be talking to an agent in Jacksonville and make a verbal agreement with them, because they will sell the property, they will close the deal, and they will send you nothing. You have to have this agreement, and the agreement needs to be sent to your broker after the signature from both agents. So that's what it says. The broker A refers, so if you are the one referring someone, so you can put the broker A, which will be One-Way Realty Group, refers John Smith to 123 Realty, and then you put the commission, 25% or 50%, whatever you guys agree upon. 25% of the full commission received by broker B on any real estate transaction involving prospect. So that covers any property that involves the prospect. He will have to pay your commission, your percentage, as you have on the agreement. So don't have anything agreed verbally. John, what would you like to add on this?
Oh, verbally or emails or text messages, none of those are good. This is great because it's in writing, it's signed by everyone, and this would protect you for sure. One other thing is referral agreements can only be with other licensed realtors. No attorneys, no friends, no family members, only between licensed real estate agents. Also, they can be licensed real estate agents in other countries as well. You have to ask for their license and whatnot, but referral agreements only between realtors.
Yes, that's a good point. Kickbacks are illegal in the state of Florida. We cannot share our commission to unlicensed person unless they are involved on the transaction, meaning buyer or seller. Okay, so I have some agents that they were calling me and say, Orlando, can I give 1% of my commission to the buyer? Yes, you can. But you have to have that in writing. It will be cut from the title company. The title company will do this on the closing statement. And then your 1% will go to the buyer toward closing. But only the parties involved on the transaction. Cannot be, oh, send it to my father. No, I'll give it to you and then you give it to your father. No unlicensed person can receive a penny from your commission. When I teach in my school, I always tell them that the only thing that you can do is a thank you note. You know, if John or Smith refers me a friend to buy a property and John Smith it's unlicensed and they buy a property with me, then I can give him a thank you note. If he's not happy with the thank you note, I can give him a thank you very much note, but nothing more than that. All right. Now,
no issues, Orlando, in giving a referral to an out-of-state real estate agent, as long as they're licensed.
even overseas, okay,
Okay.
if you have someone from Brazil, Russia, and wherever, if they are licensed in their country, you can share your commission with them. Okay. And that's one thing that's very important. All the time, I'm going to give you this example because it happens in my class all the time. I'm always tell them this: no commission. You cannot give a commission or receive a commission if you're not properly licensed, for that matter. And I had one student in my class, and he was doing the post license, and he asked me if I could refer any loan originator, because he had a friend that needs to do a refinancing or something. So I referred him one of my students in another place that was a loan originator. He was a very good guy. And he called me 2 days later and then he said, Orlando, I'm very sorry, but I cannot give referral fees. I said, what are you talking about? I'm not requesting any referral fee. No, because one of your students called me and he are referring me one of his friends to refinance the property. He was asking me for referral. And I said, well, very sorry that he said that. I already said in class more than 10 times that you cannot request any type of referral fees if you're not properly licensed. I'm sorry, I apologize that he did that. And I immediately called the guy back. I said, man, what are you doing? You can't. But I'm the middleman in this. I want to make something. No, you're not going to make anything. It's not legal, right? So what you can do is have someone that you can work with, like a lender or something, on a referral basis only. Referral clients, not referral fees. So I refer clients to the lender, and the lender refer clients to me, and then it's like one hand wash the other. But that's the only way. I cannot tell a lender, so look, I'm referring you a bunch of clients here, and I wanted you to give me 10% commission. No, not even to a contractor. If you're not properly licensed, you cannot get any type of kickback, and that's RESPA regulation. Okay, that's a RESPA regulation that prohibits any type of referral fees or kickbacks to be paid to an unlicensed person. You good? If you have any questions about that, then reach out to us. We're always here to help you. Now, there's two addendums that are not present here. We don't have much time, but I just want to mention them. John, I'm gonna let you, say something about them, and we will come back next week and we will finish that. One is the fifth addendum for foreigners. It's a very important document, and it's required by IRS, because if the seller is a foreigner and he had a capital gain when he sells the property, he has to pay income taxes over the capital gain. And for foreigners, it's about 40% of the capital gain. So that's why IRS requires the title company to hold 50% of the gross sale until they find out what is the income taxes for that capital gain. And then the title company will pay IRS, and then if there's any money left, they will be sent it to the seller. So John is going to bring it like a full explanation about the fifth addendum. And the second one is the 1031 exchange. And this is also very good, and we need to know about that from the beginning. If a seller is actually a buyer, is buying a property and he's selling another property, has to be a like-kind property. I had one example that I had in the past. My buyer was selling his multifamily property in New York and buying a multifamily property here in Florida. And the capital gain for his property was close to $800,000. So if he has to pay income tax over $800,000, he would pay a lot of money. That's the reason why they create the 1031 exchange, which is you get all the money from the sale, so from the property that you sold, and then you bring it to the property that you're buying. If there is any money left, you're gonna have to pay taxes, and it's called boot. So we're gonna bring both addendums next week, and then we're gonna be explaining you that next week. And then we're also gonna bring some other subjects. Some people are asking me about the CMA, and we're gonna explain a little bit more about the CMA, but we're gonna do that next week. Guys, do you have any question to us?
I have a question. Where does Reno live? Because that thing behind him looks so comfortable that I think our next meeting should be at Reno's house.
I second that motion.
Yeah, lovely that looks.
Reno, you're mute. You have to unmute yourself.
You are all absolutely welcome in my house, and you know that. So anytime you want to have a meeting here, please, you make me only happy.
Ah, bellissimo.
Everybody, you know.
Bellissimo. Dove posso trovare un ristorante qui vicino?
Tanti ristoranti, tu sai, tu chiamami in privato e I'm gonna give you the best restaurant that you deserve.
You have to talk like this.
If I forget, I apologize.
Yeah. All right, John, thank you again for your support, for your presence, for all the inputs that you gave to us. It's always a pleasure to have you in our meeting. Scott, thank you for being here. All guys, thank you for this meeting. And I'll see you guys next week. And for now, enjoy the rest of the week and have a great weekend. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.
John.
Thank you.
Scott, John, thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Also.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you.